But we begin this hour with this repeated promise from Donald Trump since the start of his second term in office.
Never again will the immense power of the state be weaponized to persecute political opponents. Under my leadership, we will restore fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law. My administration has acted swiftly and decisively to restore fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law. We're turning the page on 4 long years of corruption, weaponization, and surrender to violent criminals, and we're restoring fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law.
Perhaps on Earth 2, that is what Trump did. But for those living here on Earth 1, you guys need to stop laughing. We've seen the exact opposite, with Trump treating the Justice Department as his own personal law firm, going after his perceived enemies while rewarding his allies. We're totally in trouble. Sorry, Raylan. And this week, the Americans received this stark warning coming from Special Counsel Jack Smith, who sat down with my colleague Nicole Wallace in his first live television interview since criminally charging Donald Trump 3 years ago.
So I have investigated cases focusing on the facts and the law throughout my career. We did this case the same way, under the same standards, and you know, the thing that's, I think, important for your viewers to know is those standards are not meant to change from one administration to the next. And in my experience, until now, they haven't. And so, you know, I think we are facing an attack on the rule of law that is different in kind and scope to anything I've seen in my lifetime.
Joining us now, Scott MacFarlane, Chief Washington Correspondent at Midas Touch and host of Scott MacFarlane Reports, and Melissa Murray, MS Now legal analyst, NYU law professor, and author of the book, The U.S. Constitution, A Comprehensive and Annotated Guide for the Modern Reader. I just want to apologize to everybody. We are all delirious because it was a late night because of the 4th and the fireworks, and we're just tired. Thank you both.
A little laughing fit, all of us.
Too much fun.
Very much for coming to the weekend. Scott, let me start with you. And just the significance of Jack Smith coming forward in that interview with Nicole Wallace. He has never talked to anyone in the press until now. Why do you think he thought it was important to come forward and to come forward on the eve of America's 250th birthday?
A couple really important things he said, but let me say at the outset, Jonathan, Jackie, Eugene, I will not steal your joy. I'm here for it. I'm going to support it. I think the underpinnings of what Jack Smith said is that not only did the pardons of the January 6 rioters undermine our democracy and infuse our government and elections with danger, but he said the firings of the prosecutors responsible for those cases and for other cases with which Trump disagrees undermines the rule of law and sets up the Department of Justice to be weak, sycophantic, and not living up to the independence and strength it needs to be showing. This is an ongoing kinetic risk to America that only increases as the election grows nearer.
Melissa, The Guardian on Thursday had a headline that I think is perfect for your response. King Trump is stronger than ever after U.S. Supreme Court bolsters his agenda. Quote, the court has acquiesced in multiple power grabs from the White House's most consequential occupant in generations to leave a dramatically transformed political landscape. Closer inspection reveals a court that has shifted its perception of what is legally possible while accommodating Trump's extravagant and expansive view of his own presidential powers. This is a co-equal branch of government where multiple of the Supreme Court justices seem to believe in a version of the unitary executive theory. And I'm curious, as someone who has literally written the book on the Constitution, how are you thinking about what The Guardian just wrote?
Well, I think, Eugene, that the unitary executive theory is very much now codified in the annals of the United States reports because of what this court has done. I know everyone is talking about the court's decision in the birthright citizenship case, and some are lauding that decision. I think it is a muted victory, and that this question of birthright citizenship will continue to percolate over the next couple of years as Republicans continue to whip their followers into a froth over this question of quote unquote birth tourism. But to my mind, the most important decision of the term was in Trump versus Slaughter, where the court overturned a precedent from 1935 and held that the president can remove the heads of independent agencies without any congressional restraints, simply because he wants to. We are going to see a massive realignment in the administrative state as these agencies that heretofore were bipartisan and not politically oriented now become vassals of the president and indeed any president going forward.
Scott, last night, I believe, according to your Instagram, you were on the National Mall and witness to the president's speech. Pollution in the air, algae in the pool. Can you describe the environment to us and I guess just whether or not you can actually sort of feel this unitary power just going to these Trump events and being around the area where there are people now like a former Olympian who was charged with a felony for allegedly damaging the reflecting pool? What was it like? Tell us a little bit about it.
There was a lack of joy and unity for parts of the day in Washington, D.C. on July 4th, 2026. Let that just sit for a moment and reflect on that. There was a disunity underscored by the Patriot Front marching out of Washington's Union Station, some with Confederate flags, which had all the echoes of January 6th, where there were multiple Confederate flags, including one that stormed the Capitol. There was this back and forth, protesters, counter-protesters. There was anger. There was frustration at the clearing of the crowd and the re-entry through the security screenings. Yes, there was joy in moments. And of course, we find joy in moments in life. We seize upon them. But there was a disunity that was visceral and visible. And I don't think that's what people had in their mind's eye when this round number birthday was coming. I feel like a lot of people feel July 4th's joy was at least in part subdued or undermined by the disunity.
As a journalist, did you feel welcome there?
Well, it was not on the mall for the president's rally. I could tell you, as somebody who covered January 6th, I felt very unwelcome in the courthouse and the courtrooms by the rioters, their supporters, their surrogates, and their families. They tried to mute us as journalists so as not to amplify the truth of that day. And you're going to find components of that, Jackie, as we move forward. Those who amplify things that undermine the president's power and the president's views, they do get bullied, they do get menaced, and I suspect some of my colleagues on the National Mall got a bit arousing, if not menacing, from the more militant of the crowd from the start of the day to the end of the day.
You know, excuse me, Melissa, speaking of the rule of law, I'm reminded, and we played the clip yesterday on the show, of the conversation that I helped moderate that you were on, the panel you were on, at the Aspen Ideas Festival, talking about the latest Supreme Court term. And in your opening remarks, and this is what we played yesterday, where you talked about why you felt that the Supreme Court was a threat to democracy. It's one thing to talk about the president and his thumbing his nose at the rule of law, but talk more about the court's role in this attack on the rule of law.
So I think the precise quote I said, Jonathan, that was the court was an existential threat to democratic institutions. And I think that is true. And this term has really convinced me of it. When our framers sat down and wrote the Constitution in the summer of 1787, they were trying to figure out how to create a central government that was strong enough to actually do things, but not so strong that would become tyrannical. And so they created this divide between state and federal power, and then divided federal power between the three coordinate branches, each with the authority to check the others. And the point was, if one branch went too far, the other branches would step in to check them. And so no branch could consolidate power. Here we have a president with a very, very muscular vision of executive power, an unprecedentedly muscular vision of executive power. And we have a Congress that is relatively supine, literally on the couch and not doing anything to thwart the president as the president encroaches on its own prerogatives. And we have a court that seems bent on facilitating the president's worst excesses. And to me, that is a recipe for real disaster. We are not maintaining these principles of limited government. And limited government is something that conservatives used to talk about incessantly. Right. And now, it's like it's of no moment because we have an unlimited president in many ways. And the thing to me that's so galling about what the court is doing is that they are sending these decisions out with almost as though they are willfully blind to the environment in which they are going out to. We have a president that wants to go further, and this court, through its decisions, constantly allows him more yardage to do so.
You know, one of the things that was really interesting and the difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, there are many, but one of them is that the same thing that has continued to happen. Donald Trump says something and his team runs around to try to make sure that there's evidence after the fact to make that true. Donald Trump said that there was a 350-foot cut put into the reflecting pool. We have still not seen pictures of that, despite the fact that when they snatched up the leader of Venezuela, we have pictures of that within 24 hours, but I digress. Let's listen to U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro attempting to answer questions about the Olympian charged with felony and reflecting pool. Listen to
Was the sealant already partially removed? Did he rip it back? Can you just describe in detail? Because he maintains that it looks the same as it did before he arrived. That's his.
You know, I'm not going to get into the evidence. There was an effort, a violent effort, to rip up the sealant from the bottom of the pool.
Did he have any tools, or was it just his bare hands?
Right now, we believe it's his bare hands, both hands.
So does that indicate in your belief that it was probably damaged before, or do you believe that he...
Oh, he damaged it.
Further, but do you believe it had already been damaged before?
He damaged the pool.
Before he touched it?
He damaged this pool.
I'm struggling to understand, Scott, how a human being can take their hands and rip up the reflecting pool. It sounds like he didn't have any tools, she's saying, if there wasn't something that was already there. As you watch this, as someone who covers law, someone who covers politics, as you watch the kind of back and forth with Pirro, who is usually much more open about the kind of evidence that they purport to have, it feels like there may not be a there there.
Let's start off with two things. There's a mystery and there's some things we know. The mystery is who cut a 350-foot gash in a pool basin underwater in America in front of police. If Aquaman
no one saw it.
Does not have an alibi, I'd start with Aquaman. The damage David Hearn is accused of doing is something much smaller, more subtle, and did get through the grand jury in the District of Columbia Superior Court. Remember, with grand juries, only the prosecution makes a presentation. There is no defense. There is no defense witness. There is no contrarian voice or exculpatory evidence. That changes in the D.C. Superior Court when this moves toward a court hearing later this summer. And I've been covering the D.C. Superior Court since 2004. The docket has hundreds and hundreds of cases in a day. This is a minor case comparatively to what else is on the docket. Let's see what kind of patience and breadth and bandwidth the judge gives this case of a man accused of using his bare hands to touch sealant.